Hello, I'm Tayama. It is such a delight to be here with you and with my Mystic Summit co-host and friend, James Twyman, as we dive into a conversation on psychedelics and mysticism. James is an Episcopal priest, a New York Times bestselling author of 20 books, and is known around the world as the Peace Troubadour, having traveled to many countries at war to share prayers of peace. He brings such a dynamism to each encounter and teaching, and I'm so heartened that we get to be in this exploration together. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Tayama. It is so good to be here. It does feel a little strange being on this side of the table, being the one being interviewed, but I'm excited about it. We're going to have a rich discussion, and I'm so happy that you're the one who I'm going to be sharing it with.
It's such a gift to get to share this with you. I know this topic is one that is so dear to your heart and that you have so much wisdom on. Tell us about psychedelic plant medicine and how it contributed to the development of early religion.
Well, first, let me just say how surprising it is even to me that I am talking about this. Because if you had talked to me a year ago, even maybe 6 months ago, this wouldn't have been a topic that I would have had much insight on. But I would say in the last 6 months, something has shifted in me that has shown me just how important and how valuable this psychedelic renaissance is that is taking place in the world right now. There is definitely a renaissance that is taking place, given the understanding and the knowledge and the research that we now have on many of these plant medicine journeys that are happening with so many people today, that is really encouraging them to heal many of the physical ailments, whether it be depression, PTSD, many others, or for their own spiritual development. I'll say that this started for me, 6 months ago, really, when I had my first magic mushroom or psilocybin journey. I had never done it before. And I always felt that I would. I always felt that when the time was right, that would happen. I had done one ayahuasca journey many, many years ago that was very profound for me, and a couple of other journeys, but I had a feeling that an experience with psilocybin was going to change my life, and it certainly has. I'll begin by saying that using such a tool for one's spiritual development or evolution goes back thousands, even tens of thousands of years. In fact, as your question stated, one could very easily make an argument to say that psychedelic medicine journeys really were the foundation of the development of religion itself. The ancient religions and humanity's first attempts to seek an understanding and experience or even union with the divine, or at least some concept that there is a larger world outside this world, the physical world that we see. So to begin that, I want you to imagine thousands of years ago, tens of thousands of years ago, the hunter-gatherer, the early humans are tracking a herd of antelope or buffalo, whatever it may be. They've been doing this for days. They're hungry. They're tired, and they come across the excrement of the herd, and they find something growing in that they've never seen before, something very strange. One of them has the idea, maybe if we eat this strange thing, it will give us some kind of an insight into the herd, helping us to be able to feed ourselves, to nourish ourselves. So they do that. They eat this mushroom, and a whole new world suddenly opens. It's like the physical world is cracked open, and they step into this vibrant new reality that they didn't even know existed. And anyone who has been on a psilocybin journey knows that it is a full embodied experience. It's not just psychedelic. It's not just seeing moving colors. There's something that is whole about it. And when this happens to the early humans, it begins a trajectory to wanting more, to understand what this was. And this is one of the rationale that this could very well have been where our quest for knowledge of the divine started, maybe by just eating a mushroom. I like to say that in many of our cultures, your culture, your religion, my religion, the idea that Eve ate an apple started the whole thing. Well, I have a feeling it was more that Eve ate a mushroom, and that changed the whole story.
This is amazing, James. I'm feeling uplifted and heartened as I hear you speak to this. What have you found to point the way to mushrooms being at the inception of many of our traditions?
Well, to begin, we can look at some of the very ancient cave drawings that certainly indicate that these plant medicines, in particular mushrooms, were used in profound ceremonies. I'd love to show a picture that comes from a very ancient cave drawing in Algiers. In fact, this cave drawing is over 7,000 years old. Let me go ahead and bring this up on the screen. As you can see, we have a shaman type character in this picture with mushrooms sprouting out all over it, holding mushrooms in its hand, its arms, its body, its legs are having these mushrooms just sprouting out of it in all directions. This is one of the oldest cave drawings that we have ever found that show that early humanity not only knew of the transformative power of these plant medicines, but were using it very actively in spiritual ceremonies. So once again, 7,000 years old. And there are many others that show figurines with mushroom heads. There are what they call the fly agaric people, once again, wearing these mushrooms as hats. This goes back a very ancient, and as I said before, I really truly believe that something happened to our ancestors that told them that this was something very essential, that this was giving them an experience that they don't have in their ordinary lives. And it goes back tens of thousands of years. And in fact, I think where we want to go now is to show how even in the early Christian church, this was not only present, but perhaps even prevalent. This is a very difficult thing for many of us to hear, especially those who are more orthodox, because we've been conditioned to believe that these types of substances are to be avoided. They're addictive, they're evil. Back in the 1960s, when people began to experiment with LSD and other psychedelics, it was ultimately painted as being something that we should avoid. And then Nixon's war on drugs stopped all research. Almost all research that was being done to see what benefits these could bring was halted until very recently, when things began to open up again. And they began to realize that these substances are not only helpful, but they can cure things in a way that medicine can't. I was just with a dear friend of mine a couple of days ago. He talked about a friend of his who has had deep depression his entire life, has been taking antidepressive medicine. And then he heard about these studies that show how successful either microdosing of psilocybin or macrodosing can have a very profound effect. And he had one very strong journey. His depression totally, completely disappeared. They've been finding this in studies over and over and over again, using it for addiction. People who have had addiction issues, after one journey of psilocybin, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, completely disappeared. What else can we say that in many cases, these people are cured? This obviously is powerful, positive medicine for people when done right. This is one of the major caveats that we want to really, really stress, that these are not recreational activities. I think in the 1960s, especially when we began to go in the wrong direction, it was because the sacredness of the experience had been removed, and people were doing it just to have a fun time, to experiment, to amplify their experiences at concerts or whatever it may be. So the backlash was very strong. This was just a very immature beginning to the research and the experience of what plant medicine can do for us. And so it was halted. But now, as we said in the very beginning, there is a new renaissance that is happening with these journeys. And for me, that first journey, I'll speak more personally, 6 months ago, when I had a therapist come to me and work directly with me. I'll describe what that process is like, because I feel like this is the responsible way to be doing these journeys. I had a trained therapist who has been, training for many years, has been working with this substance for many years. We began with a document where she could look at all of my medical history to make sure there were no counterindicatives that would get in the way of the experience. We talked about my intentions. What do I intend to gain from this? What do I hope to receive? For me, the answer is always a deeper experience of oneness with the divine. That's all. And then, of course, during the journey, she was right there at my side in case there was anything that happened. She was writing down anything that I said during the journey. And I have to, and then of course, the final stage is the integration. This is perhaps the most important stage. So we don't just leave it at the experience. We now have to unearth the gifts, unearth the lessons, to integrate them so that they can have a greater impact on our lives. So we had that session. And I have to say that first time, by the way, it happened like directly right above me where I'm sitting right now in an apartment that I lived in at that time. I have to say, it was the most powerful spiritual experience of my life. Now, anyone who knows me or has been participating in these interviews knows that I've been on this path for almost really all my life. I was, as a very, very young age, a very mystical Catholic. I was very drawn to the mystical teachings of many of the early saints. Since then, of course, it has widened into much more of an interfaith perspective. But it's the reason I wanted to be the co-host of this summit is because the many teachings of mysticism from every direction is so dear to me, so important to me. So for me to say that this was the single most powerful spiritual experience of my life is really saying something. In fact, you asked me a question I'm just going for. I may as well just keep going. In fact, studies have now shown that, and there have been many studies, many of the major universities now are doing very important studies on this subject. But they have shown now that between 70 and 80% of people who are able to go on a directed, facilitated journey with psilocybin, 70 to 80% of them will say that it was one of the 5 most important experiences of their life. 70 to 80%. 30% will say, as I said, that it was the single most important and impactful spiritual experience of their life. So that was probably 6 months ago that I had that experience right upstairs. And just to give you a little bit more information, just a few days ago, Friday, we're recording this on a Tuesday. So Friday night here at Namaste Village, where I live, I decided to go a different route. There are really 2 distinct paths, I guess you could say. There is the therapeutic, where you would have a therapist who is experienced in this, working directly with you. And in that case, there's not much being guided. It's more about having the therapist present in case you need them. Or in my case, writing down anything that you say or anything that happens so that when you come out of the journey, you can use that as part of your integration. But the other path is more shamanistic. To have a shaman who is profoundly experienced in the medicine songs, in the deeper pulse of a medicine journey, how to guide one deeper and deeper using the music, using incense or whatever tools they may have. So it was only a few days ago that I invited a shaman in here to Namaste Village to guide me into another psilocybin journey. And as I said before, the journey 6 months ago was the most powerful experience of my life. This one was even more powerful. This one even topped that. One of the reasons is because Friday night, we do have a group of people here at Namaste listening, so they're going to know this. Friday night, we had the most colossal storm I think I've ever experienced in my life. Certainly the strongest storm with lightning and thunder and torrential rain that I've ever experienced here in Mexico. So here I am, the very height of this experience, and suddenly this storm begins. I wasn't sure if it was really even happening or if it was part of my journey. I realized pretty quickly that it was indeed happening, but it just contributed to the experience that I was having. It was almost like Zeus, throwing lightning bolts, and it would rise and fall as my experience rose and fell. And as I left this with the music and the chanting and with such deep appreciation for this shamanic approach, it was the single most amazing spiritual experience of my life. Even, and I almost hesitate to talk about these as if one is better than another, because it really isn't about that. All I can really say is that both experiences took me into the heart of what we've been discussing here in every interview, the mystical experience of oneness with God. That was it. And, yesterday I was describing this to someone. If you remember those little viewers where you had a little circular thing with pictures, you put it in and you put it up to your eyes and you're clicking to the different pictures. That's how it was. That's kind of how I experienced it, where my intention was to experience the depths of oneness with the divine, right? So every time I clicked it, it would be a new aspect, the divine feminine aspect. Click it again, the divine masculine aspect suddenly came into full view, full experience. And then I click it again, and now it was the experience of the divine in nature, the divine in art. Over and over and over, these experiences kept coming. It was almost like God, Goddess, all that is, was holding my hand, just guiding me. Okay, look at it through this lens, look at it through that lens. So there's so much more that I could say, but I'm gonna pause for a moment here to give you a chance to maybe ask a question.
James, it's so amazing to hear of your experience and the fullness of what you shared, from the history of these medicines and their impact on early religions until your experience even just days ago with them. Tell us, how have these experiences changed you? What has opened or shifted for you experiencing oneness in this way?
It's such a great question, because that's really what it's all about. Once again, in my mind, these are not tools to be used recreationally. These are sacred tools that can either be used for therapy, for people who are suffering from depression or many other things, which have been widely proven now to be profoundly successful, or for spiritual growth. After my session this past Friday, the way that I related to it, it was as if throughout my life I've been building a house, or let's say a sacred temple. I've been building this sacred temple floor by floor by floor, my entire life, through the different lessons that I've learned, the different teachings, the different teachers that I have been able to be with. And then the experience that I had, let's say Friday night, it was like adding 18 floors to that building. It wasn't like adding one. Usually, the experiences that we have, the lessons that we learn, okay, it'll add a new floor. And now I'm higher. Now I'm closer to that experience of oneness. These plant medicine journeys can be seen as accelerants on that journey, where they accelerate the growth. Now, it's important to know that this is not the only way. This is certainly not something that everyone is going to be drawn to do. You can access the same thing through meditation, through chanting, through many of the beautiful gifts that you offer, Twyman. And yet what most people have found is that using a journey in this way, especially done in the right way, is an accelerant. It can accelerate the process. It can bring you within a very short period into a very, very high mystical experience, where then you can learn these lessons and then suddenly add 18 floors to your temple. So to answer your question, I would say I still feel it. Now, this was just 4 or 5 days ago. I still feel the impact. For me, my only goal is to pray without ceasing, to constantly be in communication with the divine. And what I have found through these journeys is that experience is ever present. Like I said, it added 18 floors to the temple. So the pitch of my experience of oneness, constant oneness, has been profoundly amplified. To me, this is the only thing I want. There's nothing in this world that I really want, only that experience of that sacred connection with all that is, that we sometimes call God or goddess or whatever else we want to call it. That's the other thing that happens. And that there's so many people who have been part of religious groups, churches, and what they have found is that this shakes them loose in a way that can be so beneficial. I have friends who were very, very strong Christians, or very strong in their Jewish faith, and it didn't take them away from it. It added more to it, but it also loosened the armor. It's like the ego wears this, I envision it like a medieval suit of armor. The ego wears this armor that doesn't let much penetrate. Well, these journeys can be, if done the right way, something that penetrates right to the heart, and the armor begins to fall away on its own, and we begin to find ourselves in an experience of oneness without compromise, oneness that is beyond the definitions that we hold of our faith, our religion, our culture. We begin to experience oneness with all that is, through our brothers and our sisters, the divine. So it's still with me. I believe it will always be with me. And as a priest, I feel like this is just the beginning. I think this is a tool that is going to be accessible more and more as people realize there's nothing to be afraid of. Psilocybin, for example, and I think almost all of these psychedelic plant medicine are not addictive. In fact, they do the opposite. They can help cure addiction. So there's nothing to be afraid of, especially if you have the facilitation of a therapist or a shaman who is experienced at when you do encounter a journey or a struggle or some kind of a block, who can help you move right through it. You don't run away from it. You're curious. This is what I learned is in a journey like this, you're just curious. If suddenly a dark figure shows up in your vision and you feel anxiety or fear, that's okay. Just be curious. ask what this is for. And in almost every case, it's just going to dissolve on its own. So once again, there's nothing to be afraid of. I think, and I find that one of my passions is going to be to help expose this to a more faith-oriented, church-oriented group, first in my own Christian tradition, and then hopefully way beyond that, because I think this renaissance that we're experiencing is just the very beginning of a major evolution in our spiritual consciousness.
I'm so moved, James, as I hear you describe all this, and as you speak so passionately about the oneness that you have experienced. I can feel it pulsing through this portal here and receive that transmission. I'm curious if you feel that yearning for deeper connection with the sacred is at the heart of the renaissance that is beginning, the popularity, the hunger of many people to be working with medicine in this way.
I believe that this is what makes this current renaissance very different than what happened in the 1960s. It was very important what happened in the 1960s because there was a lot of crust that we had to break through. We had to break through the shell. And of course, like children, we're going to often do that in ways that may be or may not be effective. They may be harmful. A lot of people were very harmed in the 1960s with the drug culture and just the abandonment and the recreational aspect of it. I think that what's happening today is it's being treated as a sacred tool. Maybe not by everybody, but I think most, with all the studies that are taking place. I'll give you one example. Johns Hopkins has been one of the leading universities that has been doing very, very important studies with, I think, many plant medicines, but in particular with psilocybin. And one of the things that they did was they brought together a large group of priests, ministers, rabbis, imams, religious leaders from many different traditions, people who were what they call psychedelic naive. They had never done any psychedelics before. And they brought them together, and I think it was a week, and they worked together, and they had 2 journeys together. And almost all of them were transformed. And now these are people who are already religious leaders, but it took them, maybe it added 18 floors to their own experience. One of the first times that this was ever done was at Boston University. I think it was in 1962. And one of the people that was part of that study was Houston Smith. And many people know Houston, and he's a very important theologian. And he said that this was the single most important spiritual experience, and it helped him to actually experience what he had been studying in the Bible for so long, to have a direct experience. Now, to me, this is the key, a direct experience as opposed to an indirect experience. When done in this sacred manner, these things can be tools. They're not the only way, but they can be tools into a direct experience. That's what it was for me. And I've had other direct experiences with my own wholeness, with the divine. But as I said, this was an accelerant. It was like catapulting me into that full experience. And this is what they've been finding in many of these very important studies at Harvard, at Boston University, at Johns Hopkins. They're finding over and over again that this is real and this renaissance is really happening. Now, I'd like to go back in time for a moment because I said at the beginning of this interview that it seems that, in particular, the use of psilocybin for sacred ceremony in the early Christian church was not only present, but perhaps prevalent. Now, in many of the churches that were built in the first millennia of the Christian experience, we can find frescoes, paintings, obvious evidence that this is true. What happened, though, after the turn of the first millennium, they went in a very different direction. Many of those paintings were destroyed, lost, and yet some of them survived. So let me show you a couple of things that in particular, one church called St. Martin's in France. I'm going to just bring up a couple of slides here, beginning with this one. What we see here is a fresco in this church of St. Martin's, and this is Jesus entering into Jerusalem. Now, we know that traditionally, when Jesus entered into Jerusalem, they placed palm branches onto the ground as he came in on a donkey or on an ass. In this case, what we see here, first of all, are this man is holding on to one of 5 psilocybin mushrooms. Okay? He's holding out stems from these mushrooms. Now, over on the far left side, what you'll see is this hand coming out of this rainbow, holding something to the lips of this particular person. Now, I want to ask you, Twyman, does this ring any bells from your tradition? Your clue is that it has nothing to do with what everything else that seems to be appearing here in the fresco.
James, I'm missing the clue. I'm sorry.
Do you remember the story about Isaiah? Before he becomes a prophet, I think it's either God or the angel, holds a burning coal to the lips of Isaiah, and thus begins his prophecy. Well, if we were able to move in very close, what we would see is that this is not a burning coal that is being held to the lips of Isaiah. It's a mushroom. Okay? And in fact, I'm going to go to another picture, because this particular fresco in this Church of St. Martin's comes through in 3 different sections. I'm going to show you the second section now. So this is adjacent to the first fresco that we saw, Jesus entering into Jerusalem. And here we see a man cutting down these mushrooms. And then this flows into the one that we just saw. So once again, we see these psilocybin mushrooms being cut down and offered to Jesus. Now there's one more, perhaps the most important part of this. Let me show you one more picture from this same church. Clearly we see a painting of the Last Supper. Okay, we have 11 apostles around Jesus, and one at the very bottom who is separated, who, in my opinion, in the opinion of most people, must be Judas. And Jesus is holding something to his mouth, just as in the first fresco, we saw the angel holding something to the mouth of Isaiah. And it looks very similar to what is being held to the mouth of Isaiah. So we can only assume that in this picture, Jesus is holding a mushroom, especially when we look and we see that this is not a typical Seder meal where you would have wine, maybe you have bread. You don't have any of those elements. What you have here are cut up mushrooms all on the table. Okay, and if you look at the folds of the 4 on Jesus, well, on our left, Jesus' right, the 4 that are closest to him, if you look to the bottom of their tunics, you see mushrooms all planted throughout. So here's the question. What is the artist trying to tell us here? Well, we don't know exactly, but obviously there's a mystery that is happening here. The artist, I believe, and many others have believed that it was a common use, or maybe it wasn't common. We don't know. We can only suspect that there was certainly a knowledge of using these powerfully spiritual plants, these psychedelic mushrooms, to access these high spiritual states. Now, there have been definitely people who have taken this too far and have run with the image, even saying that Jesus and the early Christian story and the Last Supper, the Eucharist, that all of these things were metaphors for a mushroom cult. They've taken it too far. I don't want to do that because there's no way for us to know. This has to come through our direct experience. That's why I think this renaissance is so important today, because these clues, like these, there are many, many, many more that I could show you. The book that I would recommend, if anyone wants to read it, is called The Psychedelic Gospels by Jerry and Julie Brown, where they visit all of these churches and look at the evidence to support their conclusion, and many others, that this was a part of the early church. And as so many things are, when they didn't understand it, when it was just too powerful, it was squashed, it was pushed away. But now it's coming back. And I think that this is an important tool for each one of us. Not everyone, but for those who are called to use this sacred accelerant into the divine mysteries that we've talked about with so many people here in this beautiful summit. This can be a very, very important part. So me as a priest, ever since I've been having these experiences, I felt this longing and this definite call to help bring this out more. I'm in the beginning stages of working on a feature film, a narrative feature film, where we can, almost in a Da Vinci Code sort of manner, use entertainment to show some of the things that we're talking about here, so that people can realize this is accessible. This done right, this is not dangerous, and done well, this can add about 18 more floors to your temple.
James, I'm so moved to hear you talk about this sacred accelerant and the importance of direct experience, which of course is at the heart of all mystical practice. I'm wondering how uncovering these strands in your own journey and what you're tracing in early Christianity and religion, how does this change your lens or experience of your tradition, if it does?
Once again, a very good question. It brings light. I think some people worry that an experience like this may cast a shadow over their own tradition. And you and I have talked about this before. It will if that's what our choice is, but that doesn't have to be our choice. For me, it has brought me deeper. It has brought light to my own Christian tradition. You and I have talked before about wrestling with God, wrestling with our traditions. And for me, it's almost like that wrestling with God has now turned into a beautiful dance, because it's no longer something that I have to grapple with or understand. I can just open up and experience it. The journeys that I've had so far have just lifted me into a higher light. And yet, if we look back at, let's talk about the Christian tradition for a moment, how integrated this is with some of the most common stories that we tell ourselves. Let's take my favorite, Santa Claus, okay? In the Christian tradition, we love old Saint Nick. Most people believe that the Santa Claus legend came from Saint Nicholas, who was a very early, I think, third or fourth century bishop in Italy. And he was known for his secret gift giving. So most of us have been told that the legend of Santa Claus came from Saint Nicholas. It didn't. Let me tell you where it really came from. Okay, so first of all, we need to understand something that was happening and still happens in Siberia, in the upper Laplands, with the shamans and the herders of reindeer. Okay, Reindeer have a particular passion for a particular mushroom called the fly, look at that, agaric mushroom. Okay, they love it. And reindeer that often consume the fly agaric mushroom, many times they'll just sit there in the field looking up at the sky as if in awe. Now, the fly agaric mushroom can be relatively poisonous to humans. And what these early herders and shamans found, now, I don't know who the first person was that tested this. It's a bit strange. But what they found was that if they ingested the urine of the reindeer after having eaten fly agaric mushrooms, their bodies could assimilate it, and they would have an experience as if flying through the air. Now, a couple of other things. The fly agaric mushrooms grow primarily in the shade of evergreen trees. Okay? And the shamans found that the potency would increase if they picked them and then hung them from the evergreen trees. Is this starting to sound familiar? This is where the Christmas tree practice came, hanging ornaments from the trees, from these shamans hanging mushrooms so that they would dry. Here's another. In the dead of winter, these shamans would then take these fly agaric mushrooms and they would put them in little packages, and they would then distribute them to the herders, the reindeer herders, and so that they could ultimately get to the urine of the reindeer and have these altered experiences. However, in the heat of, or the heart of winter, these very small yurt-like homes, the snow would be so high that they couldn't get through the door. So guess how the shamans got the mushrooms in and came in? The chimney. They entered through the chimney. And traditionally, these shamans wore red and white outfits that look very, very much like the outfit that Santa Claus wears. So the question is, how did that happen? How did it happen that this Saint Nicholas, we tried to, I can't think of the word, to somehow make it more palatable to our Christian values. Oh, it was a wonderful 3rd century bishop who would give away free gifts. That's where Santa Claus came from, the shamanic world of urine drinking reindeer herders. In order that they could fly, they could have this experience of flying through the air. One more piece that brings it all together. I'm going to show one more picture here, and this was a very, very common Christmas card image, probably for a very long time, but certainly in the early part of the 20th century. These are early 20th century Christmas cards, all of which feature fly agaric mushrooms. Many of you have probably seen this before. It's a very common Christmas image of these psychedelic mushrooms that ultimately brought us to the legend of Santa Claus. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because we've adopted some of these stories, maybe not the essence of the stories, but we've adopted these stories. We've made them more palatable to our sense of religiosity. But all of them came from this longing to experience the divine, and nature gives us everything that we need. So just as Eve maybe had her, I actually have a little cartoon that shows Adam and Eve sitting at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And she says to Adam, it wasn't so much the apple that got us in trouble. It was when I ate that mushroom and the snake started talking to me. And the same thing with Santa Claus. So I think all of this leads us back to the understanding that when done in the right way, these can be powerful accelerants and sacred tools to our awakening into the experience of mysticism. And isn't that what this summit has been all about? It's not just about hearing about the experiences of other mystics, but understanding how we can enter into this experience. I'm not telling people they need to go out and have a mushroom journey, though if you find that is calling you, yes, go. But whatever you do, enter into the experience, seek the experience of that oneness with God, with each other, with all that is, and whatever tool the divine or nature or however they come to us, use those tools because they can be powerful allies on our path.
James, this is phenomenal. I'm so moved. I'm curious if you can tell us how this piece, this additional awareness of nature giving us everything we need, how working with mushrooms in this way changes or deepens your connection to the sacred in nature. And I'm also curious if there are ways you see we can connect the dots between stories like the current Santa and the original Santa. How do we bridge that gap?
You know, maybe it's as simple as saying we don't need to rely upon the stories as we once did. Take Santa Claus, for example. It was sterilized so that it could be a children's story, a way for children to understand the value of the Christ consciousness, of the birth of that within ourselves, of gift giving, all of the different things the beautiful gifts that we receive from Christmas. But maybe we don't need those stories anymore. Maybe this renaissance that we're engaged in now shows us that it's not just a few mystics at the peripheral, because that's usually where they are, in the peripheral of many of our religious traditions. It's not just a few of them, it's all of us. We're all ready for this. This is the moment that we can all come into direct access, direct experience of the divine within. That was my experience. And as I said, I mean, when 70 to 80% of the people who under clinical studies, this has been proven now, have an experience that they would say at the very least is in the top 5 of their whole life, that's something that we have to look at. We don't need the stories now because using some of these tools brings us into a direct experience.
Yes, to the blessing of the direct experience. James, it's such a gift to receive this transmission from you. For folks who are drawn, how can they learn more about your offerings and your work?
Well, I'm just beginning my own journey into how I can take the experiences that I've had and make them available in one form or another. As I said, we're just beginning the process of working on a feature film. I've had the opportunity to direct or produce a number of feature films. The best is Redwood Highway, if you've never seen that, or Indigo or others. But this is one I feel like I have more passion for than any others that I've been able to help create. But if people want more information on me, they can go to jamestwyman.com. And you can see some of our programs. One of the things that I love to offer the most is I've been guiding people through a program I call the Enlightenment Partnership Program. There's information on that on the website. It's a 3-month, very intensive program where we work together every single day in order to enter into that direct experience. Now, we don't use, these plant medicines in that, though that could change, who knows? But I'm just so passionate about this mystical journey into that experience of oneness. And this is why I love, as I interviewed you, as we saw the commonality of our Abrahamic faiths, as we see the different paths into that state of oneness through all the different lenses of all these amazing people that we've brought together through this Shift Network Mystic Summit. This is invaluable stuff. And this is the moment. This is when the Renaissance is happening.
This is the moment. This is the Renaissance. Thank you so much, James, for this weaving. It's such a gift to be here with you and all in this Mystic Summit.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure working with you, with the entire Shift Network staff. And as I say every interview, all of you who are watching, we wouldn't be able to do this if it wasn't for you. And we just, I know that Twyman, I hope that you're receiving even a fraction of the gifts that we've been receiving, having the opportunity to share with all of these amazing teachers.